3,000 years ago, the 20th emperor of the great Shang dynasty was Emperor Zhao. He was the strongest and most invincible man in the country. But lately he has become more obsessed with all kinds of entertainment, especially girls. While ordinary people fought for the right to exist, robbing each other, leaving their homes and selling their children for food, the emperor spent every evening in luxury, gourmet dishes and charming girls. On one of these nights, one of the emperor's concubines invited him to have fun with him, as she was able to notice that the emperor was not enough of those girls with whom he had fun before. The emperor replied to his concubine that for all the time he had fun with these girls, he did not feel completely satisfied. Then the concubine said that she was worried that her emperor was not satisfied, and she offered him a couple of glasses of good tiger wine with her. The emperor felt a surge of strength and grabbed his concubine to enjoy her to the fullest, telling her that she was many times better than all the previous girls, and that he would not end his pleasure with her until he had completely spent all his strength. However, the emperor was distracted by loud sounds from the heavens, which indicated the grief of the dragon turtle. Then the emperor decides that now is not the best time for entertainment, and he decides to interrupt his pleasures and orders the concubine to put on her armor, call the soldiers and saddle the horses, which did not suit her very much. The dragon turtle was a divine beast that was given to the emperor by Dashan, and the ancestors of this turtle were extremely peaceful creatures throughout its existence, and so the emperor was concerned that it was now suffering. In a matter of minutes, the emperor was already fully equipped in his battle armor. After the emperor was ready to move out, he broke through one of the walls of his palace, and thereby found himself on the street, where he landed near his horse and ordered all the assembled soldiers to move out. None of the soldiers had ever seen the emperor as worried as he was now, and so no one even bothered to ask him what exactly happened, and all the soldiers simply followed their emperor. Meanwhile, the emperor was thinking that the tortoise could not scream due to any injuries, since it was under the strict supervision of the high priest of the Temple of Heaven, and he wanted to know as soon as possible what happened to the tortoise, because the fate of the whole country depended from her. The soldiers tried with all their might to catch up with the emperor, but he and his horse overtook them in an instant. When the emperor left his soldiers far behind too quickly, 4 guards immediately rushed after him. Third Guardian Diao So and Senior Guard Yao Gu told everyone to keep up with the emperor, or they would all be sentenced to death. And then 9th Guard Yen Jiomei and the 7th Guard Xu Tong immediately hurried after the emperor. At one moment Yen Jiomei noticed that the air around her briefly became more pleasant in smell, and turning around she noticed how the emperor's concubine was overtaking him. After a few seconds, this concubine was already able to overtake all the other guards. When the concubine overtook the emperor, she leaned against him and asked him why he aroused her so much at first, and then immediately left her alone. The emperor only told his concubine that they were all going on one very important matter, after which he ordered the concubine to urgently return back. The concubine only said that she did not care how serious the matter was, and that she still wanted to be with the emperor, to which the emperor said that she could stay if she did not interfere with him. A few minutes later, the emperor with his concubine, guards and soldiers found themselves at the foot of a high mountain, on which the Temple of Heaven was equipped, into which the emperor immediately rushed to find out what was happening with the tortoise. Once in the Temple of Heaven, the emperor saw how the dragon turtle of incredible size continued to scream for an unknown reason. The emperor wondered why the dragon turtle was so furious, despite the fact that people for several dynasties gave these creatures only the best food that they had. Then the emperor decides to ask the high priest of the Temple of Heaven why the dragon turtle is now in such a state. The high priest watched over the dragon turtle for 5 dynasties and was over 500 years old, and the only person in the whole country who did not fear the emperor, since the high priest had an independent position. The high priest told the emperor that a great dragon turtle catastrophe was coming to this world soon. After this statement, he ordered the servants of the Temple of Heaven to start attacking the tortoise with bowls of burning oil. The emperor could only watch as a group of servants doused burning oil on the sacred beast. At that moment, the high priest told the emperor that the great dragon turtle catastrophe would put the entire country in great danger, and only the law of Heaven's frontier could help them. The emperor was very frightened that the great catastrophe of the dragon turtle could expose his country to great danger, and he wanted to find out from the high priest where this catastrophe could come from. The high priest pointed to the emperor in the distance, and said that the purple chief from the west was a threat to them. The emperor realized that it was in this direction that the emperor of the city of Shichi, whose name was Ho Shibua, was located. Meanwhile, at the Sibo-ho residence, his wife was having a very difficult delivery. The maids were very worried because the second birth of Mr. Ho's wife is much more difficult than her first birth. Bai Shui, one of Mr. Ho's maids, was very worried about the condition of her future mother, and she tried her best to support her, holding back her tears with difficulty. One of the maids asked Bai Shui to warn Mr. Ho about her wife's serious condition, and Bai Shui immediately ran to Mr. Ho. Bai Shui ran to Mr. Ho to inform him that his wife is now in a critical condition and she wants to know what they should do. Meanwhile, Mr. Ho was sitting in his residence and guessing on hexagrams. Mr. Ho told Bai Shui that even though the birth was difficult, his wife and unborn child would be all right. Bai Shui could not calm down, and she said that his wife was in incredible pain during childbirth, and she was very worried about his wife. Mr. Ho continued to guess on the hexagrams and said that he was never wrong, and his predictions always come true, and that everything would end well, after which he sent Bai Shui back. After Bai Shui left Mr. Ho alone, he noticed that despite the fact that everything would be fine with his wife, there were 6 hexagram min and 1 hexagram kun in front of him, which spoke of a fight with a wild dragon with a black-yellow blood. A fight with a wild dragon with black and yellow blood testified to the great danger for the child in the womb, and in 99% of such cases the child dies before birth. The hexagram also showed that on the 9th of September the emperor will leave this world, and with a 99% probability this supreme child will become the new emperor of these lands. However, Mr. Hao once again looked at the hexagram and saw that if his child eats any fruit, then the bone will definitely get stuck in his throat, and then he will die. The complete prediction said that his unborn child would become 99% supreme, but one day he would have to give up, and as a result, the entire Sibo family would die, which really scared Sibo Ho. It began to rain heavily outside, during which thunder struck, indicating that the baby was finally born. Sibo Ho then decided to immediately run to the birthplace to find out if his newborn baby was okay. Once at the entrance, Bai Shui opened the door to Mr. Ho and said that his wife had finally given birth, but something terrible had happened. Going inside, Mr. Hao saw one of the maids holding the blue and lifeless case of a newborn by the legs. The maid said that the baby did not cry after the birth and did not even scream, and that now he could not breathe. Then the maid handed over into her father's hands the body of a child with red eyebrows and a strong physique, whose skin turned completely purple due to the inability to breathe. The father could not come to terms with the fact that this world was not going to accept the child of heaven, who had been in his mother's womb for 3 whole years. Meanwhile, in the temple of heaven, the high priest began sacrificing the bodies of temple people to the dragon turtle, grabbing their heads and throwing them into the air. Thus, a crowd of people with an unenviable and inevitable fate appeared above the head of the dragon turtle. Meanwhile, the high priest used one of his skills, during the use of which all the people thrown by him were torn into pieces, thereby forming a bloody rain over the dragon turtle. At this moment, the water in which the turtle was restrained began to turn blood red, and the turtle itself began to absorb pieces of human flesh that fell on it from the sky. Some guards looked at all this horror, and could not help but admire this rain. However, this caused Jiome some disgust, and she could not understand what everyone found so beautiful in such a disgusting sacrifice. But she decided to hide her disgust. Also, Jiome noticed how the emperor's concubine enjoyed not only the sight, but also the taste of the drops of blood that fell on her. At this time, the high priest stepped onto the dragon tortoise shell to form a powerful stream of solar blessing and finally complete the heaven's frontier law. After administering the law of heaven's boundary, the high priest descended from the dragon turtle, after which it immediately calmed down and stopped showing signs of aggression. The emperor saw that the dragon turtle was showing aggression, and he thought that now they could be calm, with which his concubine congratulated him. The archmage told the emperor that if nothing happened to the dragon turtle within the next few minutes, then everything would end well. Meanwhile, Sibo Ho just watched his newborn child grow colder, and life slowly fade away inside him. Mr. Ho couldn't hold back his tears and thought about how a person like him could endure such hard blows of fate. After which he remembered that if you eat the fruit, the bone will get stuck in your throat. Ho then asked Bai Shui to immediately bring incense to him. Despite the predictions, Mr. Ho couldn't just watch his child suffer. Mr. Hao knew that the number 99 was the highest number, and if you manage to endure all these torments, you can turn the hexagram, change fate, and thereby save the life of your child. Then Mr. Hao decides to set fire to the incense, and put the end of it on fire to his son's throat in order to extract the bone. The child begins to cough from such pain, because of which the very bone that did not allow him to breathe flies out of his throat. Having got rid of the bone, the child was able to emit its first cry, from which the very heavens shuddered. Hearing this cry, the dragon turtle began to get even angrier than before. The high priest felt that he was now in a position to calm the tortoise again. However, the turtle was instantly torn into small pieces, and from this event the battle for the child of fate began. The high priest told the emperor that he tried his best to prevent what happened, but now the fate of the whole country has changed dramatically, and now the emperor needs to take everything under his control. The emperor considered that Sibo Ho could not have changed the fate of the country on his own, since he was much weaker than the emperor, and that he had neither courage nor courage, and for all this, his only son is now held hostage, and therefore the emperor does not could understand who could influence the future fate of the empire in such a way. The concubine of the emperor considered that any demon or spirit could be much more dangerous than any person, and she believed that the emperor could get rid of such a mistake. After that, the emperor went out in front of his soldiers and guards to give them the order to go to Shichi and find there those people who deprived them of the dragon turtle, after which they should finish them off without a drop of regret. Yao Gu said that his undercover agents were working at the Shibuaho residence all the time, who must have been able to collect a lot of useful information, and that within a month he would be able to provide the emperor with a report. But first he wanted to know if it would be wise for him to intervene if he was here. Sibo Hao himself will be implicated. The emperor said that even if Shibuaho himself was involved in this, he could also be killed if necessary. The next morning, masters led by Sibo Ho came to him to congratulate him on the birth of his second son. Sibo Ho was not entirely sure that everything would be fine with his son, and whether his birth was a blessing that would bring them happiness, or a curse that he and his family would have to put up with. Li Jiang told Mr. Ho that he did a lot of good for his people, for which people loved him, and that this child is nothing but a heavenly blessing. Shi Jiang, despite his low eloquence, agreed with everything that Li Jiang had said earlier. Xu Xiang said that last night he saw a bright purple light in the sky, and he could say with all confidence that this is not just a child, but a real treasure. Li Xiang said that a good person like Mr. Ho could even control the heavens. Lord Ho told his employees that only the most unusual and powerful people are able to change fate, which says that his child will die sooner or later. Then Xu Xiang reminded Mr. Ho of a long time ago, when the fifth ancestor of the Ho clan once ordered his soldiers to exterminate the dogs, and then they were captured in the Valley of the Dead, and how this ancestor used the 9 yin-yang cauldron movement technique, thanks to which they switched places with enemy fighters and defeated them. Xu Xiang suggested that Mr. Ho teach his son this technique, and then he could avoid cheating fate and live in peace. Despite such a simple and reliable plan, Mr. Hao considered that to master this technique perfectly, it would take a lot of time and effort for a person. Xu Xiang said that it would take only 3 months for a person to master this technique, and that if Mr. Ho needed, then all the inhabitants of Shichi would be ready to give their lives for the life of his child. Then Mr. Ho thought that if everything went as Xu Xiang said, then his child would be safe, after which he asked all his employees to look into this matter. At that time, all the employees said they were ready to give their lives to keep Mr. Hao's son safe. Meanwhile, Mr. Ho's maids were breastfeeding his insatiable child. All the maids were extremely amazed at such an appetite, since the child did not have enough breast milk from one maid, and therefore he was fed by several maids at once. That evening, Mr. Ho lay in his room while Bai Shui sat next to him, and told him about his son. Bai Shui told Mr. Ho that his son was extremely quiet and obedient, and how 5 days after his birth, his height was already 60 centimeters. However, this news slightly surprised Mr. Hao, because if his child were born the same way as all children, then he would now be about 2 years old. Despite this, Mr. Ho was still haunted by the future of his son and his vision at birth, and he was very afraid that his son would live very little. Later, Mr. Ho decides to visit the maids to admire his son himself, whom he named Heir. Mr. Ho looked at his son's face, which had bright eyes that were full of confidence and calm. Mr. Ho saw that his son was doing well now, but he still could not finally understand why his hexagram did not give an accurate prediction result, and he could not figure out how his son's fate would ultimately turn out. Later, Mr. Ho took out a strange gem that almost killed his son, and he remembered that if his son ate the fruit, the bone from it would get stuck in his throat, and he simply assumed that perhaps this stone had nothing to do with the fate of the child. However, every time heir saw this mysterious stone, a bright smile and loud laugh would always appear on his face. Many of the maids who worked as nannies for Mr. Ho met such unusual children as heir for the first time, and they considered him to be the messenger of the gods. At one point, the nannies even thought that heir might actually be the reincarnation of some dangerous monster, and Bai Shui accidentally overheard the conversation of other maids. Then Bai Shui could not stand it, and told the maids to stop talking about heir in such a way, and she said that he was a very calm and healthy child. In response, one of the maids jokingly said that Bai Shui is very protective of the baby in the hope that when heir grows up, he will marry Bai Shui. Bai Shui became embarrassed and began to shout to this maid that everything was not at all as she said, and that she had no reason to protect Mr. Ho's child in such a way. On the 20th day of his life, little heir had already learned to crawl confidently like a 2-month-old baby. Bai Shui enjoyed playing with little heir every day, whose energy seemed boundless to her. During the game, little heir tried his best to show that he wanted Bai Shui to breastfeed him, but she couldn't do it. Watching their son smile and listen to his laughter, Mr. Ho and his wife were calm and happy. However, at one point, Ho Shibwa turned his attention to his wife's sad expression, and he decides to ask her why she is so sad when their son is now alive and well. She replied that when she first saw the face of her newborn son, she remembered Ji Kao, her eldest son, and she could not imagine what would happen when they both met, and whether they would be able to meet each other even once. The fact is that the Shang dynasty established a law throughout the country, according to which all families in the country must send their eldest or only sons to the capital when they turn 7 years old, and there they will have to study literature, folk songs, art, and etiquette. Despite such educational goals, everyone understood that their sons were simply being taken hostage, but no one could resist the word and law of the emperor. Ho Shibwa said that their sons meeting with each other would definitely take place, and that his wife had nothing to worry about, because when the 9-tripod technique was completed, their family would be safe. Night fell, and all the people in the residence had long been asleep, and at first glance, no one was in danger. However, in the middle of the night, several guards of the emperor, accompanied by the senior guard Yao Ge, entered the residence. Ho Shibwa heard some extraneous sounds from outside, and he decides to go outside and find out who was able to get here. Ho Shibwa's wife wakes up at the same time, and he tells her to stay inside and monitor the whole situation. After that, Ho Shibwa jumped out of the bedroom window to inspect the situation and understand where the intruders were now. The guards noticed from hiding how Ho Shibwa left the walls of the residence, and one of the guards offers to finish him on the spot. A second later, all the guards left their hiding places and rushed to attack Ho Shibwa. Ho Shibwa had time to react to the guardian's sudden attack, and he decides to use the power of the earth element to defend himself against the attacks. After that, Ho Shibwa surrounded himself with stone pillars, which were supposed to absorb the blows of the guards. The guardians attempted to deliver several heavy blows to Ho Shibwa, but they failed to break through the summoned stone pillars. Dao Su and Zhu Thisen realized that Ho Shibwa's reputation as a good warrior was not in vain, as he possessed the power of the 5 Qi elements. Then Zhu Xin decided to use his battle rod to use the 100 fishing technique to grab Ho Shibwa and immobilize him. Ho Shibwa dodged such an attack without any problems, saying Zhu Xin that such a simple technique will not be able to neutralize it. After this, Ho Shibwa ran towards Zhu Xin and charged, yelling at him about how they could break into the compound at night. However, Zhu's fishing rod Sing was caught on a tree behind Ho Shibwa, after which he sharply pulled the fishing rod towards himself. From such a strong and sharp jerk, the fishing rod uprooted the tree and sent it towards Ho Shibwa. As the tree flew towards Ho Shibwa, it turned into a huge wooden fish with leaves instead of scales. When Ho Shibwa noticed a giant wooden fish flying towards him, he decides to use the power of the fire element. Then, from the hands of Ho Shibwa, burning flames flew swiftly towards the wooden fish, which burned the fish to ashes in a matter of seconds. Right after Ho Shibwa burned the wooden fish, Dao Su appeared behind him, ready to plunge his spear into Ho Shibwa. However, Ho Shibwa manages to concentrate his chi energy at the site of the strike to reflect all incoming damage. After using this technique, the enemy's spear was unable to penetrate Ho Shibwa's back. Then Ho Shibwa turned to Dao Su and told him to tell him everything about the current situation, otherwise Ho Shibwe would simply kill him. At that moment, Yao Ge managed to stealthily sneak up to Ho Shibwe and plunge his blade into him. Ho Shibwe thought that if some of the best guards of the emperor broke into his residence, then the emperor wants to kill him. Meanwhile, Dao Su tried to attack Ho Shibwe with his fists, but he managed to react to such an attack and grab his arm. At this time, Shu Tong broke through one of the walls of the residence, and found himself in the bedroom where the maids and heir were sleeping. The maids immediately woke up and were terribly afraid that someone had broken into their bedroom, but heir did not even wake up. Shu Tong told the maids that their child looked very appetizing, after which he asked them to give the child to him to eat. After that, Shu Tong grabbed one of the maids by the neck and crushed her, leaving only a pool of blood in her place. Shu Tong wiped the bloody mark on his face and guessed that the younger his victim, the stronger their taste. After this, Shu Tong approached Bai Shui with little heir and asked her to give him the child. Bai Shui hugged the baby as tightly as she could and started calling for Mr. Ho's wife for help. Then Shu Tong waved his huge hand towards Bai Shui and said that he would beat her to death. Bai Shui manages to kick his blanket towards Shu Tong, causing him to lose sight of them for a while, and Bai Shui decides to take this opportunity and run away from him. Shu Tong more, and after a few seconds he still managed to remove the blanket that had blinded him. After this, Shu Tong was able to find Bai Shui and the child running away from him, and he began to catch up with them. After a couple of seconds, Shu Tong was able to grab Bai Shui and stop her. Bai Shui thought that this was the end, and she began to beg Shu Tong that he could do anything to her, but that he did not touch the child. Shu Tong said that the more she asks him not to touch the child, the more he wants to eat it first. After that, Shu Tong simply throws Bai Shui aside and continues to hold the child. Shu Tong lifts the child above him and tells him that his emperor himself ordered him to finish him off, after which he is going to eat him. However, little heir manages to bite Shu Tong in his mouth, which made the little one laugh out loud. Shu Tong was even more pissed off by this, and he just picks up and throws the baby with all his might into the floor, hoping that this will kill the baby. However, when all the dust had cleared, there was a living heir lying on the floor with a huge bump on his forehead, after which the baby began to cry very loudly. Shu Tong did not understand how this child could survive such a powerful blow, and get only a bump after it. Then Shu Tong decides to simply crush the child with his foot to silence his cry and finish him off. Shu Tong almost managed to crush the baby, but a large log flew towards him. The blow was so powerful that Shu Tong's body simply flew off at high speed and thus flew through one of the walls of the residence. In front of the child, his mother appeared, who was able to push Shu Tong as far away from her son as possible. Ho's wife told her child that he should stay here while his mother deals with the villain. Ho's wife went to Shu Tong's side to try to find out from him why he wanted to kill her son. When Mr. Ho's wife left the baby, he crawled towards his mother. When baby heir crawled a few meters, Yan appeared in front of him. Jume, and he was the emperor's 9th guard. Yan first Jume was about to kill the baby, but little heir wanted to be picked up and hugged. Meanwhile, Lord Ho continued to fight off the emperor's guards. Diao So was surprised at how Ho Sibo, even with a severe wound, could easily fight the emperor's 3 best guards. Ho Shibwe told the guards that if they did not lay down their weapons and surrender right now, he would kill them all. Dao Su did not take Ho Shibwe's warning seriously, as he believed that Mr. Ho was now in an exhausted state. After that, Dao Su grabbed his spear and charged towards Ho Shibwe to finally finish him off and complete the task. After his attempt to attack Ho Shibwe, Dao Su's spear broke while he himself lay on the cold ground with his ear cut off. At that moment, Xu Xian appeared and cut off Dao Su's ear, telling him that if he was not going to listen to Mr. Ho's words, then he would no longer need his ears. Then Diao So decides to use his 1000 fishing skill to try and take out Xu Xiang. However, the skull that was at the end of the fishing line suddenly broke into small pieces. Later, Mr. Ho was joined by Shi Jiang, who, with his accurate shot, managed to crush the skull on Diao's fishing rod. After that, on Diao So flew a hail of arrows, which he tried in every possible way to repulse. Yao Ge believes that more help may come to Ho Shibwe soon, and he decides to retreat with the rest of the guards, after which he takes out a special whistle, by the whistle of which all the other guards will understand that they are going to retreat. Diao So stuck his hand into a small basket, saying that Ho Shibwe would pay for going against the will of the emperor. After that, Diao So took out the puffer fish from the basket to use the poison bomb technique to escape safely. A second later, A large poisonous cloud of pale green color formed at the place where the guards were standing, through which it was difficult to see the silhouettes of the guards. Ho's servants wanted to start chasing the emperor's guards, but Mr. Ho said that they shouldn't go into this poisonous cloud. At the other end of the residence, Mr. Ho's wife tried to find out from Shu Tong why the emperor's guards decided to break into their residence in the middle of the night and try to kill their child. Shu Tong only said that a strange woman was standing in front of him, and that he had an order from the emperor himself to kill her and the child. Hearing a loud whistle, Shu Tong realized that the guards were going to return to the emperor. Before leaving the residence, Shu Tong said that their task was completed and that the child was now definitely dead, after which he left the residence. As soon as Heir was with Yan Jiume, she made the decision to kill the child. However, Heir did not pose any threat to her, but simply crawled towards Yan Jiume started hugging her. Yan Jiume thought that this was just a harmless child, and she did not understand why everyone presented him with some kind of monster, and she changed her mind about killing the baby. A little later Yan Jiume heard Yao Gu whistle, which told her that the emperor's guards were preparing to retreat. Yan Jiume was about to leave, but she was about to be stopped by Mr. Ho's wife, who belittled her not to touch her child. Yan Jiume looked at the child and whispered to him that as long as the rest of the guards weren't around her, she could let him live, but next time she wouldn't miss her chance to kill him. After this, Yan Jiume throws the child towards the mother and returns to the rest of the guards. Hao's wife manages to catch her son and hold him tight, hoping that she won't let him go again. Heir himself simply lay in his mother's arms and simply looked towards Yan Jiume, who left the residence within a couple of seconds. That same night, Ho Shibua met with his servants to discuss with them the attack by the emperor's guards. Ho's wife blamed herself for leaving their child all alone, causing one of the guards to nearly kill him. Mr. Hao only hugged his wife and said that she had nothing to blame herself, since their child is now alive and well with them. Mr. Ho understood that this situation could happen again very soon, and he was never opposed to the emperor, but he was very sorry that his emperor wanted the death of his child. Mr. Hao was suddenly distracted from his thoughts when he saw an eagle flying by in the window of the residence. Then he remembered his hexagram, which said that an eagle flying over the moon speaks of an imminent catastrophe that threatens not only his family, but the whole Siki. Ho's subordinates believed that such a hexagram could well come true, especially if we remember that Emperor Zhao was a real tyrant, and most likely he will represent the entire impending threat. Then Mr. Hao interrupted his employees and told them that as long as he was alive and as long as his heart beat, he would not allow the inhabitants of his city to suffer. Also, Mr. Ho believed that if Emperor Zhou wanted to somehow harm the city, then nothing would stop him, since he had a lot of masters and professional warriors under his command who could easily capture any large city in the shortest possible time, and the defense of the city Shichi will not be able to stand against his army. Ho's elder brother, who would definitely help the city when he completed his studies. Mr. Hao hoped that his method of protection could save not only his son, family and residents from danger, but also the rest of the city with its inhabitants. Then Mr. Ho orders his subordinates to recall Shu Shuangwei from the border back to the city, and Jioding Sifas must intensify his advance. Meanwhile, the guards are waiting for the eagle, which they wanted to use to send an urgent message. After the letter was given to the eagle, Yao Gu began to scold the rest of the guards for Ho Shibua's failed attack attempt, and he especially criticized Zhu Tong. Yao Gu beat Zhu Tong, kicked him and insulted him for not being able to kill the baby. Zhu Tong tried to apologize to Yao Gu and told him that he almost managed to eat the child, but he was distracted by the child's mother, all of which could be confirmed by Yan Jiume. Then Yao Gu turned to Yan Jiume and asked her to tell everything that was there, to which she replied that when she arrived at the place, the child was no longer anywhere. Yan herself, Jiume, thought to herself that she would never kill a child, especially a defenseless baby. Yao Gu hoped that they were telling the truth and told all the guards that if next time they screwed up like today, then he would not spare anyone. A month had passed since the guards attacked the residence, and the emperor still could not wait for news from them. The concubine tried with all her might to distract the emperor from thoughts about their task, inviting him to somehow have fun together. The emperor said that he now had no desire to have fun at all, and every day he worried more and more. Then the concubine told the emperor that he needed to take his mind off these thoughts, and so she came up with an entertaining game especially for him. The emperor was interested in the concubine's proposal, and he decided to play her game with her. The concubine ordered the emperor's guards to bring them one pregnant woman. The emperor did not fully understand why she ordered the pregnant peasant woman to be brought to him. After that, the concubine asked the emperor whether this woman was pregnant with a boy or a girl, to which the emperor replied that there was a boy in her stomach, but they would have to wait a couple of months to find out for sure. The concubine said that initially she also assumed that she had a boy, and since the emperor also thought so, then she made her choice on a girl. Then he said that they didn't have to wait for the birth, and she offered to open this woman's stomach and find out right now who was in her stomach. After this, the concubine allowed one of the guards to rip open the belly of the pregnant woman. While the guard was taking the child out of the dead mother's belly, the emperor became extremely interested in playing this game. After a few seconds, one of the servants handed the child to the emperor and told him that it was a boy. After that, the emperor told the concubine that he really liked this game and asked her what reward she wanted. But the concubine said that since the emperor won, she must fulfill any of his wishes. At the same moment, an eagle flew to the emperor with a message from the guards, who a month earlier broke into Hoshibwa and attacked him. The concubine put the eagle on her hand and took away from him a note from the guards, after which she praised the eagle and wanted to reward him for such a long and difficult journey. Then the emperor began to read a letter from the guards, while the eagle flew away with the body of the baby handed to him, which a minute earlier was taken out of the mother's stomach. The emperor read the message of the guards, and the concubine asked him how the guards were doing. Having read the message to the end, the emperor fell into unprecedented rage because the guards were unable to neutralize Hoshibo and his family. After this, the emperor decided that he now needed to visit the high priest again. When the emperor arrived to the high priest, he told him everything that was written in the message, and the high priest said that this was not even bad, but very good, and that it was enough for the emperor to simply capture all of Shichi, and then the traitors would not represent any or a threat. Hearing this, the concubine asked the high priest why he thought the news was good. Shichi was currently concentrating on transporting copper sand, and Hoshibo was doing this to reapply the Yin sacrificial utensils technique Yang, which was already used once by the long-time ancestor Hoshibo. The emperor was very indignant at what Hoshibo was going to do and said that he would definitely make a trip to Shichi. But the high priest told the emperor not to rush to solve this problem. The high priest told the emperor that Hoshibo was going to deploy his troops, but he would not let him do so. The high priest said that when the emperor's troops were assembled, they would be ready to strike a serious blow, but also the emperor could take advantage of the surprise effect and disrupt all their plans, and after that the heavens themselves would send such severe disasters to Shichi that not only people would die, but and all animals with plants. The emperor was more than satisfied with the plan proposed by the high priest, hoping that the most terrible and painful disasters would fall on Shichi. The concubine began to suck up to the emperor, comparing his attack on Shichi with a fight between a bull and a praying mantis. Then the concubine invited the emperor to have some fun together, but the emperor said that he needed to solve a few more serious issues. After that, the emperor gave the order that the first army of the demon Shui advanced to Shichi. At this time, the western tribe of giants lived peacefully in their small settlements, and during the next meal they received an order from the emperor, which indicated the movement towards Shichi. The seventh senior giant Xiaoyao was surprised that after such a short time, the emperor tells them to go on a new conquest, but since they simply have no choice, he decides to find Yao Shui. The second eldest Fanmei tells Xiaoyao that as long as at least one enemy lives, Yao Shui will not rest, after which she pointed out to Xiaoyao where Yao Shui is now. Having learned about the new order from the emperor, Yao Shui ordered everyone to get ready for the road to Shichi. The emperor's son was already 2.5 months old, and his physique was like that of a 5-year-old child, and his physical characteristics were much more developed than those of his peers. On one of those days, the grown-up heir played ball with other children in the street. During the game, heir jumped up to the ball very high, and kicked it so hard that the ball simply could not withstand such a blow and burst. One of the children who owned the ball immediately began to cry when he saw that his favorite ball was ruined at one point. The boy immediately ran towards Mr. Hao's son to speak to him. When heir landed, the boy grabbed him and began to threaten him with death. Hao's son was not in the least afraid of such a threat, and he pushed the boy away from him so hard that the boy simply flew a few meters above the ground. Li Jiang, who was also the father of this boy, managed to catch him. Li Jiang told his son that he should not contradict or be rude to Mr. Hao's son, to which the boy said that he himself was bullying him. Meanwhile, Heir shouted to Xiao Duzi, Lejong's son, that he is a miser, and that he will no longer play with him. While Heir was teasing in front of Xiao Duzi received a very strong click on his forehead. Heir was sharply hurt, and he decided to find out who had the courage to offend the son of Ho Shibwa himself. Bai Shui began to sternly, but without any anger, explain to Heir that he should learn to be a good and worthy monarch who should take care of his people, and that he should not have too much pride, after which she asked him to apologize to Xiao Duzi. After a nurturing explanation, Heir approached Xiao Duzi, asks him to forgive him for ruining the ball and for this blow, offering him his bamboo grasshopper, which he made himself, after which Xiao Duzi accepts the apology, after which he invites him to be friends. The next day, Heir and his father went to a place called Yinbaishan. At one point, Heir got bored and decided to hunt the local inhabitants, cranes, and he managed to grab one such crane. Ho Shibwa clasped his hands together and turned to his elder brother, telling him that he had wanted to come here for a long time, but due to some circumstances, he was only able to do so now, after which he began to apologize for his son's behavior. The elder brother said that he remembered the time when Master Tianyin began to teach Ho Shibwa, after which he wanted to learn, hoping that he could inherit Taoism. Ho Shibwa said that he came to power in order to make peace with the Western countries, so he asked his elder brother to forget their past differences and teach him the technique of moving Emperor Yin Yang's sacrificial utensils. Ho's older brother became so furious at such an unusual request that the water in the waterfall suddenly rushed in a large stream towards Ho Shibwa. After that, the ground began to tremble under the feet of Ho Shibwa and his son, who was not at all surprised by such a shake. Ho Shibwa's elder brother appeared before his younger brother, and told him that this technique could lead to disastrous consequences for all of Shichi if even the slightest mistake or inaccuracy was made. Ho Shibwa said that his son is closely connected with the heavens, and if they fail to save him, then the emperor will never rest until his son is dead, and this technique is their only way to pacify the imperial ardor. Ho's elder brother came out of the dusty curtain and said that he was also not satisfied with the emperor's actions, and told Ho Shibwa that if he wants to improve relations with the West, then let him do it, knowing that his elder brother he doesn't care. At that moment, Heir jumped onto Mr. Ho's elder brother's shoulder and began to ask him to take off with him one more time. Ho's older brother very angry, and he angrily told Mr. Ho's son that he could easily kill him with a flick of his finger. However, Heir was not at all afraid, and what's more, he began to tell Mr. Ho's older brother that he had a very funny face. Ho's elder brother didn't understand how such a kid didn't have any fear of him, while Heir began to tease him. Ho's elder brother considered that Heir was not an ordinary child and said that if this child did not exist in this world, then the whole world would be in balance. Ho-sama's older brother then grabbed the child's chest and used his great flame technique to test its resilience, after which Heir was covered in hot and bright flames. Mr. Hao had no choice but to beg his older brother to show his mercy and not kill his son. After this procedure, Mr. Hao's older brother tells his son that now the kid will not even think of treating his elders without respect. After a couple of seconds, Heir regained consciousness and asked his uncle not to do this to him again. Ho's elder brother lowered the boy to the ground, which he mastered well and corrected his mistakes of the past, and hoped that Heir also realized his mistake and would not make it again. After Mr. Ho's elder brother let his son go, he gave him a jade pendant and told him to do good deeds, and then he might not think about his consequences. Ho's elder brother said that this world may be destroyed because of Mr. Ho's son, and that he is disturbing the entire world balance, but he also hopes that this disruption will lead the world to something good. After that, the elder brother turned to Ho Shibwa and told him that if he was going to use the technique, then everything would depend solely on his morality and the will of the gods, and that he could no longer help him, after which he left Mr. Ho and his son. Ho Shibwa only thought that if the older brother said that he would not help anymore, then he should only rely on his own efforts. At that moment, Heir told his father that he was very hot, and when he took off his outer clothes, he saw a large burn on his son's chest. Mr. Hao realized that the true fire of the 5 factions still continued to flow in his son's veins, which dispelled all evil with its aura and stabilized his mind. Ho also noticed that the jade pendant directed cold currents towards the boy, which protected his skin from the excess heat of the fire of the 5 factions, and slightly increased his son's chances of surviving during the sacrificial utensil technique. Then Ho Shibwa told his son that his uncle had given him a very valuable gift, and that he should thank him for it. After this, Mr. Ho and Heir bowed towards the waterfall and thanked Mr. Ho's elder brother, after which they went home. At the behest of Ho Shibwa, the residents of Shichi began to transport tons of copper sand towards Mount Linglong. When people delivered copper sand to the bowels of Linglong Mountain, they poured all the sand into one large pit, from which the copper sand melted over time and formed a lot of molten yellowish liquid. For the possibility of melting copper in this large hole, a deep opening was made, from which the heat of the planet's core got outside, and it was thanks to this that copper melted very quickly. When the copper became sufficiently liquid, specially trained and prepared people poured the resulting copper liquid into special stone molds to obtain copper essences. When the copper inside the mold cooled, people broke these molds and made ready-made copper tripods from them. After receiving copper tripods, craftsmen carved special patterns talismans on them around the clock with extremely high accuracy, and if during this process the master made a mistake, then the entire tripod had to be redone from the very beginning. The creation of one such tripod took 10 days of continuous work of many workers. Meanwhile, at the Shurden Taoist temple, an angry Yao Shuai condemned the emperor's guards for failing to complete their task due to the fact that they underestimated Ho Shibwa's capabilities. Yao Shuai thought that since the emperor's guards could not cope with such a task, then all of them, except for Yen Jiomei, should commit suicide.